Imagine, if you will, a young antiquity biking to his cousin's house, eager to see when Overwatch is.
We announced Overwatch 2 in 2019.
Back when no one knew who to pick for certain heroes, and seeing the very old armor packs that Torb used to give out.
But at the same time, development on the PvE experience really hasn't made the progress that we would have hoped.
Oh, well, I guess we should start at the very beginning to see where things got a bit on the rougher side. Personally, I was not really into the Overwatch scene until the launch of Overwatch 2, but I was there when it began in 2016. So I'll try to summarize the history of Overwatch, its big metas, and its effect on its player base, and how it overpromised something that could never be delivered. Back in the days of early Overwatch 1, the game had a very bright future, having 10 million players in its open beta, and eventually launching to 7 million players in the first month, and gaining 15 million in the following months, more than twice its original player base, its bright world, and even brighter characters. All 21 of them at the time, promised an entertaining experience with all games being potentially different from each other. Since the game was such a big deal, especially in its beginning phase, of course the smart thing to do was to update the game with new content to keep players entertained. Some content included LTMs like the Summer Games event and holiday events like Halloween Terror. In the following month of July 2016, Ana was released as the first new hero in the roster. At this point in the game's lifespan, the meta was essentially Deathball, a comp consisting of Lucio, Reinhardt as the main heroes, and including another tank, a support, and usually 2 DPS, depending on who was more meta at the time. The meta would then evolve even further and introduce the classic Beyblade meta, in which an Ana would nano a Reaper. They would combine ultimates, and it would in turn make Reaper become essentially a Beyblade. Things shifted a bit when it was announced that Overwatch was going to have a professional esports scene through the Overwatch League. Just a small detail, and it won't start until late 2017, but I had thought to at least mention it. Now, going back to the hero roster, the next hero to be released was our favorite hacker, Sombra. Sombra did not have that much of an impact on the meta, at least to the same amount as Ana did. She had a timer on both her translocator and stealth, so she was more of a get in and get out type of hero, compared to her playstyle today where patience is more of a key component. The last and third hero to be released during Overwatch's first year was Orisa, a tank with a spear and the ability to spin. Oh, sorry, not yet. She had an orb that pulled people together and a soccer net. She was released during the dive meta, so I don't necessarily think she saw too much playtime, at least in higher elos. But take that with a grain of salt, I wasn't there at the time, sorry. I can say on the other hand though, she became very strong in the later metas, though we'll get there soon enough. Speaking of the dive meta, the comp was formed by characters that could swiftly kill a target and get out. The shift from Deathball to dive meant Reinhardt fell out of the meta in favor of Winston, although Lucio could be played in a dive comp. So it would consist of Winston, Genji, Tracer, and Diva, and the final person would either play Zenyatta for the damage boost or Lucio. Again, although Lucio could be played in the comp, he was eventually subbed out for Mercy during the infamous Mercy Moth meta. During this time, Blizzard released one of their most hated heroes, second to only Genji, Doomfist. Packed full of bugs at launch and a fist that could theoretically level a skyscraper, Doomfist was a pretty interesting DPS character. Yes, back in the old days, Doomfist was a DPS character. Before his block, he had an uppercut that could send you and your enemies flying. He briefly shook the meta, but it stabilized relatively quickly and went back to traditional dive. About 2 to 3 months after the release of Doomfist came Moira, a support that could both blow people to heal them, of course, and suck people off to damage them, of course. A simpler character with not much utility, but a pretty high healing output, meaning she was easier to play for newer players. She was also played a bit with the Goats comp, but her release marked the downfall of the Moth Dive meta, as in the same patch, Mercy got some major nerfs to her Resurrect. As time goes on, the Overwatch League begins on the 6th of December 2017 and ends with the London Spitfire winning the grand finals during the Season 1 playoffs in July of 2018 and taking home the $1 million prize. Going back in time a little bit and you'll see a certain character get released. A character that made playing Dive impossible. On March 20th, 2018, Brigitte hit the scene and was made to essentially counter Dive. She had a stunning shield bash, no ult required unlike nowadays, a flail that could push people away, and a relatively strong passive. Since Brigitte could shut down any dive attempts, the meta soon shifted from a fast-paced diving attempt on certain support heroes to a more poke comp with double sniper, marking the end of the dive meta. Soon, however, a very strong comp would be discovered. On July 24th, 2018, a new tank hero would be released to Overwatch, a hamster with a giant mech ball. Wrecking Ball was not the most meta pick, as the meta would shift to its most notorious era. Speaking of the meta, it shifted from double sniper to one of the most well-known and hated metas, Goats.
On Houston, it's Jake on the far. This combo's worked well for them before, but as soon as they see the defensive setup, they will just simply swap it away. Crucial time lost here for the Outlaws.
Just letting the fans give their,
The comp would consist of Reinhardt, Zarya, Diva, Moira, Lucio, and Brigitte, which meant no DPS, which also meant nothing died. All supports had a strong AoE heal, and tanks had a huge chunk of health, meaning nothing could be bursted down. In a way, it was just Death Ball, but if you gave the players steroids, maybe some pre-workout. Eventually, Zenyatta replaces Moira to win the Goats matchup, and Goats as a meta lasted nearly a year from September 2018 to July 2019. During the reign of the Goats meta, in November 13th of 2018, Ashe was released to the public, being a shorter range sniper with the ability to light people on fire with her dynamite. The unfortunate circumstances of the current meta meant Ashe was not really a good pick, as the 3 tank 3 support comp would just roll over you. Again, on March 19th of 2019, a new support hero was released, Baptiste. An okay support pick, but under the same circumstances as Ashe, he was released during the time of Goats. Although unlike Ashe, Baptiste did see some time in the meta, but then was eventually replaced by Lucio again. During the time of Baptiste, the second season of Overwatch League started in February of 2019 and lasted until September of 2019, with San Francisco Shock taking home first place and winning $1.1 million. Turning the clock back a bit, during the second season of Overwatch League, Sigma was released on August 13th of 2019, bringing another tank into the game and, importantly, bringing a roll queue system into the game. Sigma would see a high pick rate as Goats was no longer possible in roll queue. He would slowly become more of a meta pick, but briefly before was the Fridge meta, where Reaper and Mei combined ults and had a field day. It eventually evolved into the double shield meta and became the meta comp to run, with Orisa and Sigma being the primary tank picks, Reaper and Doomfist being the best picks for DPS. Variations also included Bastion and Mei, and for supports, Lucio and Moira were mostly picked. Variations would also differ if you had a Bastion, which meant that Mercy or Baptiste would be replacing Lucio as the main support. During all of this, a very important announcement was made on November 1st, 2019. Overwatch was going to have a sequel. The announcement was surprising to the player base, as it was also announced to have a PvE mode where you could play with your friends and stop Null Sector from invading the Earth. The PvE aspect of this new game was pretty much the sole reason of why it added 2 at the end of its title. This, in my opinion, was the major shift for both the game and the player base, as the main game of Overwatch was going to stop newer content from being released in hopes of releasing it for upcoming Overwatch 2. But not all the content, keep that one in mind. From late 2019 to 2021, not much happened, so to briefly run by the changes, Overwatch League Season 3 starts from February 2020 and lasts to October 2020, with San Francisco Shock defeating Seoul Dynasty and winning $1.5 million. Echo was the final hero to be released in Overwatch 1 on April 14th, 2020. Hero pools became a thing. Doesn't look like a fun thing, but it was a thing. Overwatch League Season 4 starts from April 2021 and lasts to September 2021, with the Shanghai Dragons winning first place and taking home $1.5 million. About 4 days after Overwatch League Season 4 begins though, Jeff Kaplan announces his departure from Blizzard Entertainment, with Aaron Keller taking his place. I think I'm forgetting something though. Wait, what was it? Oh, right. That happened. Ugh, that's tough. Back to the present time of 2022, Overwatch League Season 5 starts in May of 2022 and lasts to November of 2022. But this time it takes place in Overwatch 2. With the new 5v5 format, it certainly shifted the meta. On April 26, 2022, the first public beta of Overwatch 2 was released, with Sojourn being the first new playable character in the game since 2020 with Echo, and lasted until May 17th of 2022. On June 28th, 2022, the second and final beta for Overwatch 2 began, Younger Queen being the second new hero available for Overwatch 2, and it lasted until July 18th, 2022. Players' hopes were high and were excited for the release of Overwatch 2, with the addition of a new mode, new maps, and especially new heroes, and a PvE mode. Otherwise, players were soon going back to Overwatch 1 to prepare for Overwatch 2. During the last few days of Overwatch 1 and the beginning days of Overwatch 2, the hype was high as the revamps caused the hype on all platforms, and people who previously either never played Overwatch or had left came back to a game that had promised a new experience. When Overwatch 2 was released, all the aforementioned things Blizzard had promised came relatively true. We had a new 5v5 system and big reworks, including but not limited to the shift of 1 tank per team, character reworks, a new store system, and a free-to-play system with live service. Although personally, I'll never forget waiting in those 3,000 players in queue and having to have a phone number to sign up.
Overwatch 3, man. Get with it, man, or start molding. I don't give no fuck, man.
The big one that was promised but never delivered was the fact that it had no PvE, a big selling point of the game shifting to a new system and cause of why Blizzard had essentially stopped working on Overwatch 1. At the time, it was initially thought that PvE would eventually come out in the early seasons, and in the meantime, PvP was the main focus at the moment. The game continues as normal, disregarding the overpriced items and skins, but hope and attention were again peaking for what was essentially the revival of Overwatch. During the mid-season of Overwatch 2 Season 1, editing Sue here, actually, the first event of Season 6 started in March of 2023, so I was about 4 months off. My apologies. Overwatch League Season 6 was starting to begin and is still currently running to this present day. The meta at this point was to run a dive comp with the main tank being Winston, both the DPS picking Sojourn and Reaper, and supports being Kiriko and Lucio. This comp saw Reaper using his ultimate with Kiriko's Kitsune Rush and Lucio's Speed Boost to recreate a dive comp with the power of a pseudo Beyblade. Although I've also seen some variations where Reaper is replaced by Tracer or Genji, and Winston being replaced by Zarya. in which case Kiriko would be replaced by Baptiste. In time, Season 2 would be released on December 6, 2022, and Ramacho would be released to an underwhelming result. Although his strengths were a bit on the weaker side of things, with the right combinations he would be unstoppable, such as Nano Annihilation or Annihilation with Kitsune Rush. In my own personal experience, I remember Zarya being a very popular pick in Season 1, and eventually she got nerfed in Season 2. Roadhog quickly became the new meta pick alongside Doomfist for about a week, and then Doomfist got nerfed, and then it was just Roadhogs everywhere. There was news of Sombra and Roadhog reworks in the future, with the former half being announced to be included in Season 4 at the earliest, I will admit, but as of the latest roadmap, that won't be happening anytime soon. Sorry for those who's waiting for the reworks. In the third season of Overwatch 2, the hype has started to fall off, and it was soon realized that the Big Fancy 2 was more of a 0.1, as in Overwatch 1.1, and it was just a shop update with some new heroes. Although there was a new map, it was overshadowed by arguably the biggest event in the season, which was the One Punch Man collab. And, well, it was either that or the Lover Watch. I have both Mercy and Genji's hearts, so they're mine, you can't have them. All in all, a very simple season. Now it's about time to talk about the most recent season, which is Season 4, as of the time of recording this video. Life Weaver was released on the same day the season launched, which was on April 11th, 2023. He was met with, again, underwhelming results. His healing per second was mediocre, and his ultimate was also on the weaker side, and his controls were funky. His ultimate was also on the weaker side, feeling kind of like a weaker but longer lasting transcendence. Most importantly, his life grip is probably one of the most controversial abilities that you can use in this game, in a sense that you can either save many lives or save the many enemies from powerful ultimates, most notably Reinhardt's Shatter. As the meta continues to move and shift, I think the most recent meta would include Junker Queen, as her recent mid-patch buffs have really buffed her to a new level of tanking. But with Sigma also starting to be re-enabled and ranked, we might see a more poker-oriented composition, but that's just my guess. Now you might see that I haven't mentioned any PvE aspects since the beginnings of Overwatch 2. The latest event as of the posting of this video is the Star Watch event, a pseudo PvE event where you're either on the defending team of the Infinite Empire or the attacking team of the Watchers. The Doomfist AI was a big component of the attacking team, and let me be honest, his AI is not that great. But the biggest news to date and the inspiration for the purpose of this video was the recent announcement on May 15th, 2023. PvE is officially cancelled. Aaron Keller and Jared Noose announced on stream that the PvE aspect of Overwatch 2 was being scrapped, the very reason for Overwatch 2 was no longer in development. A very big and controversial decision, and many players are frustrated in the fact that the previous years of Overwatch development were buff for naught, and to dig a hole even further, it was known by developers all the way to a year ago, and yet they still lied from then to now. The development of Overwatch was certainly full of ups and downs, from its early days of hope to its more recent doomer days, but in the end, it certainly led up to an overpromised game. Anyway, this is the first time I've done anything like this, so if I get some things wrong, just go ahead and let me know. Now, personally, I don't think that Overwatch will die solely because of the lack of PvE content, although please don't quote me on that. I think the game will still have its players and that the game will still move forward, but it's very disappointing that such a big factor of Overwatch 2 is so far permanently cancelled. I really wouldn't be surprised to see the player count drop solely because of this. All in all, I'm very disappointed by this decision. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a bit worried about the game's future. But that's all I have for today. Hope people watch this so it doesn't look like I'm just talking to a brick wall.
On the bright side, this will make a great game development documentary on Netflix. Maybe we can call it Overpromised.
Oh my god!